HighCast 027. 027. HighCast is recorded at Highland FM. Go to highlandfm.org.au. Start your volunteering experience. You could end up like me. Maybe not like me, but kind of a good version of me, maybe. This podcast is presented or brought to you by BrightSpenders. BrightSpenders is my optimization tool where I optimize my finances. My wife did a video for Anthea being brightspenders.com in the Highlands, and she talked about how the tool helps her get all of her spending out of her head and into a manageable system. And she had a really good she talked a really good analogy of how going through her finances or our finances was like cleaning out the wardrobe. And you look at some things and you go, well, it might have been good at the time, but it either doesn't fit anymore or it's not the right season, so you chuck it out. So our experience with BrightSpenders has been really beneficial for my wife and I. We've now got our spending and our spending plan on track, and we're planning to do things like go on really cool holidays and buy investment properties. So if you want to do stuff like that, go to brightspenders.com. Anthea will help you out. Our guest today is Troy Myers. Troy is a Highlands local and paleontologist with University of New South Wales. Welcome, Troy.
Hi, Dave. How are you?
Very good, thank you. So what kind of paleontologist are you?
I am a vertebrate paleontologist, so looking at animals with backbones.
This is going to be what I had. Ben Fitzsimmons from Hume Colon, and he's a geologist. And I had to, unfortunately, spent half the podcast going, so just, explain to me what that means. So a vertebrate paleontologist is what? Backbones?
That's right. Any animal that has a backbone, essentially, or a very primitive backbone. So not invertebrates, not bugs and creatures without backbones that live in the sea, etc.
That's so already. I was saying to Troy before we started, I've been really excited about this podcast for a very long time because I don't get to have conversations about vertebrates.
Not many people do.
in all seriousness, like it isn't a common topic of conversation. We don't talk about, hey, that thing's got a backbone.
Yeah, exactly. That's I suppose people grow up with looking at dinosaurs, etc., but that's about the extent of our interest initially, isn't it? So
I joked on Facebook yesterday that I got a paleontologist coming on. We're going to talk about bones and Jurassic Park. And is that what people think about?
That's the first thing that comes to mind is dinosaurs. Yeah, pretty much.
So dinosaurs had backbones?
They do.
Yes, I got that bit right.
You got that right. Look, dinosaurs. Most people think that all fossils or paleontologists only study dinosaurs, whereas it's really just a very small group that study dinosaurs in particular. So I don't look at dinosaurs, no.
Okay, so what do you look at?
So I study early marsupials.
So earlier marsupials. So for a lay person and not intelligent person like myself, life started 4 billion years ago. The Earth was formed 4 billion years ago.
Correct.
Life sort of a couple of 100,000 years after that, or
that's right. So about it's been pushed back all the time, but probably about 3.5 billion years ago.
So 3.5 billion years ago, and that's what single-celled organisms.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So single-celled bacteria, early blue-green algae. So life for pretty much the first 2.5 billion years of life on Earth.
So what's that, 3 billion years in Earth time?
Yeah, so 3,000 million years was just very boring single-celled organisms.
Okay, and then what, fish and aquatic life starts to get more complicated?
That's right. So people might be familiar with the Ediacaran fauna from Canada. A lot of people will be. Burgess Shale, Ediacaran fauna. And basically this is life's first major experiment in becoming more complex, if you like. So we had creatures, suddenly there was an explosion of life, and we had organisms with multiple tissues. They were quite bizarre looking things. In fact, one of the best known animals is called hallucigenia. It looks so bizarre. It was a thing that walked around on. It had tentacles growing out of its back and walked around on little pegs. So life just went crazy for a couple of 100 million years.
Is that the Permian? No, that's not the Permian explosion. It's another.
That's right. Yeah, they're not Permian. So this is Precambrian. Yeah.
Precambrian.
Yes, Permian came a little bit later, about 250 million years later.
So we're at 3 billion years.
Yep.
And the aquatic life is going crazy.
Mm-hmm.
And eventually they get to animals that have. Oh my God, my language is really going to struggle today. What's shark cartilage? So you've got animals that have exoskeletons.
That's right. So initially they were all soft-bodied animals, and this is why they're generally not found in the fossil record, because animals with soft bodies made of jelly and whatever don't preserve particularly well, only in very rare circumstances. So once life got going, it took a long time for cartilage to develop and teeth. But once they started to evolve, life again took off, and vertebrates started to dominate.
So when did vertebrates? So we got to 3 billion.
Yep.
3 billion. Yeah. What did you say?
Got to about 3.5 billion.
3,000 million years. So three.
Yeah. So for a good 2.5-3 billion years, life was just the single-celled organisms. People might know the stromatolites from Shark Bay in Western Australia that are still in Hamlin Pool. There today. So basically they were the organisms that were existing on Earth. Quite an inhospitable environment. We didn't have much in the way of oxygen, etc. So it wasn't until about 500 million years ago that we started to get the first experiments.
How fascinating is it that, first of all, the scales of time. So
incomprehensible.
Yeah,
isn't it?
4 billion years. Yeah, whatever. It's going to take me 15 minutes to walk to the shops. 4 billion years. It really is an incomprehensible amount of time.
Of course it is. Yeah.
But then you think 3.5 billion years to get to vertebrates, and then all in 500,000 years, we've gone from the first vertebrate animal through to you and I sitting here doing a podcast.
Yeah, that's right.
Talking about creatures, the first vertebrate creature. Like
exactly.
it's pretty incredible to think.
500 million years, yeah.
Oh, did I say 500,000?
500,000, 500 million.
Yeah,
what's 100,000 and then what's 1,000 years?
Yeah,
so
that's...
We deal in millions on a daily basis. So.
And that's why I opened the conversation with, it's really fascinating to talk about things, because people like yourself, even your vernacular, the time scales that you use is going to be completely different from most people that you meet.
Of course it is. Yeah, and humans, we're used to, we've only been around in 100,000 years, the most primitive human, if you like. So, and we deal with our lifespans 70, 80, 90 years. So very hard to think about thousands, hundreds, let alone tens of thousands, millions.
And so you're studying, so you've got 500 million years of vertebrates that are, let's say, part of your portfolio, for want of a better word. Do you concentrate on any particular vertebrate species, for want of a better word, or genus, or? That's
right. So we, our research group, we concentrate on marsupials, which Australia.
Oh yeah, you told me that.
So we
terrible.
Pretty much 25 to about 10 million years in that little 15 million year window.
Yeah. Okay. So to do the timescale again, you're capturing what, the last, 5%? Not even that, 2.5%.
Yeah,
of time.
Very small fraction, that's right.
Wow.
Exactly. So, the fossil field we work on is the deposits from Riversley in northwest Queensland. The oldest is about 25 million years. And we do have some very young sites, but the majority fall within that 25 to 10 million years.
So tell us about the research project that you're working on.
Yeah, so people might know Riversley. It's a World Heritage Area, and it's actually one of the... David Attenborough described it as one of the 3 or 4 most important fossil sites in the world.
Have you met Sir David?
No, he did come up to Riversley, but it was a year before I got there. So he's quite fascinated with the project. And we've actually named a few species after him. The most recent was a marsupial lion, about little pocket-sized marsupial lion. So.
Hang on, a marsupial lion that's only the size of your hands?
Yeah. So,
how is it a lion?
Well, it has all typical lion features. A lot of people would know the marsupial lion, Thylacoleo.
Is that like the Tasmanian tiger?
Yeah, well, it's pretty much. It was called the most dangerous fellest creature of all time by Owen, one of the the world's great anatomists of the 19th and 18th century. and it was probably the size of a large Siberian tiger, and may well have overlapped with early humans. Sort of, it only died out maybe 50,000 years ago as the first indigenous people arrived in Australia. But what we're dealing with is that family of marsupial lions, and from Riversley we have probably 5 or 6 different species, ranging from these leopard-sized marsupial lions all the way down to little kitten-sized, possum-sized things.
And when you say marsupial lions, it's not that they're of the same genetic lineage; it's their appearance.
That's right, exactly. So they have no phylogenetic, no relationship with modern lions or tigers, placental animals,
felines, or.
That's right,
yeah.
Exactly. They're more closely related to wombats and
cool.
wombats and
love
koalas.
that. I love that. It's a fascinating story.
Pretty much they all started from this group of wombatiforms all started from wombat-like animals, and there were a huge diversity of things that look like wombats. People might know that Diprotodon, the largest marsupial that ever lived, it was sort of the size of a Volkswagen and walked
so
around.
Cool.
Large rhinoceros-sized thing. This is from that group. They all started out as these wombat-like animals, and from that, koalas diverged, and marsupial lions, and a few other animals.
That is completely fascinating. And this is all 25 million years ago. Was Australia an independent continent, or is it still part of
part of Gondwana?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, we'd separated by then. So probably 10 million years prior to that, we'd separated from Antarctica, and the Antarctic current had developed, which basically caused the southern waters to freeze, and was the first time we had an ice sheet develop on Antarctica. So it had a really important effect on world climates. We'd just become totally separated. We were sort of hinged at Tasmania, was sort of just holding on to Antarctica about 35, 40 million years ago. So by 25, we'd drifted quite a bit north of there.
So you're really studying the evolution of marsupials as not independent's not the right word, but free from influence of other species of animals.
Exactly. With Australia had become isolated, so evolution was happening just within the continent. There was no longer this huge interchange of animals between South America, which was part of Gondwana. So, we're connected to Antarctica. On the other side, we're still connected to South America.
And they had placental mammals there, whereas we don't. Is that correct? We didn't have placental mammals?
We have placentals now. We have introduced.
Oh yes, of course. But before Europeans came along, or before the introduction of the dingo, for example.
Yeah, we had. Well, the only placentals we had were bats and rodents, and they've probably only been in the last 5 to 10 million years that they've come in.
Hang on, how did rats and bats get here?
Well, bats just flew in from the north.
Of course they did. How else are they going to get here? Just teleport? Like, come on. Bats flew in. Thanks for asking the really tough questions, Dave.
The rodents seem to have come in 2 waves. So we have a group called the Old Endemics and the Young Endemics. So the first one seemed to have come north again, island hopped from the north about 5 million years ago. And we actually have native rodent species. People may not be aware.
There's apparently some at Mittagong in the water, in the lake at Mittagong.
Yeah, they're pretty widespread. Yeah.
How cool is that? Yeah.
And then more recently, within the sort of the last million years, 500,000, there's been a second wave of rodents as well, which have adapted and are now true Australian endemics as well.
I love the fact that when you were talking before, and I asked the question, was it still part of Gondwana? And you, as a paleontologist who studies vertebrate animals, not just about the specific species that you're looking at, but you understand the context of time and the other science that goes around that. And that's one of the things that I love about science. Is it's not just about a particular area. You've got to understand the context or the other scientific contexts.
Yeah, exactly. You have to be, particularly in paleontology, you have to be a generalist in a lot of fields. So a lot of paleontologists have done a lot of geology and a lot of biology, a lot of zoology. And in fact, a lot of paleontologists are employed in medicine, in anatomy in particular. So you have to be not an expert, but you have to have covered, a whole range of fields.
So how does one start off? Did you want to be Indiana Jones? Or he was an archaeologist. Did you want to be?
I did actually want to be Indiana Jones at one stage.
My wife said, make sure you mention when we asked the kids. My wife's an archaeologist.
Right.
Or a historian rather, but she's trained in archaeology. And she asked the boys, what does an archaeologist do when they dig up dinosaurs, apparently? So I had to mention that. There you go, Liz. I mentioned it live.
Yes, there's the constant confusion between archaeology and paleontology. We sort of accept it. We get called archaeologists all the time.
Well, one's humanity, one's... Well,
that's right. One's looking at human civilization pretty much, and one's everything prior to that. So, no, I didn't want to be a paleontologist growing up. I always had an interest, like every kid did, in dinosaurs.
And sorry to interrupt, but I think I remember having that interest too, and I'm watching my children go through it now. But somewhere the magic of dinosaurs dies. The reality of life somewhere just kicks in. It must be like grade 2 maths or something like that, and it dies off. So how did you continue that love of science through? Yeah,
most people grow up, don't they? But no, I had three little great aunts that all lived together their whole life, and they somehow cottoned onto the fact that I, liked dinosaurs and was interested in Australian and the protodon, etc. So they used to send me pretty much on a weekly basis. They would cut articles out of the newspaper and send them to me. So on anything to do with paleontology. So I ended up just following it, not by choice. I'd received these weekly news articles, and so there was always the interest there. But I guess, like everyone, it died off in high school. I didn't do biology or geology or anything like that.
Really?
In high school, no. I went concentrated on physical sciences and chemical. I wish now I'd done biology.
But you still had a science focus.
I did. I wasn't very good at it.
Yeah, I'm not very good at anything. So,
so I went to university. In fact, I started off doing computer science, which I hated, and it was in fact the last end of the first year. Sitting before the final exam, sitting in a computer lab and realising that this was going to be the rest of my life doing computer programming.
Yeah, okay.
And I said, no, this is not for me. And I went back and looked at the science handbook, and I found, just skimming through it, under geology, I found a little footnote that said students can choose to do a combination of geology and biology, which is paleontology. So I was one of the first people to actually take that up. So the next day I went and enrolled in that.
Really? So it's a combination of, and this is again why I started HighCast, because every person you meet has a complicated story, and so yours goes along the line, it's obviously more nuanced and there's complexity to this, but you had some, let's call them crazy great aunts that that live together, who think, I'm just going to send this child some information on dinosaurs. You go off and forget about. I get beaten down into the days the society, and you go, well, computers are going to be all the rage for the rest of humanity. I should be involved in that.
Yes, exactly.
But then one day you turn to an obscure little handbook, and the bottom left or right hand corner you see a dot point, and your life changes in one little moment that you see. And that's your story, but everyone has, that sliding mirror. It's a crappy movie, sliding doors movie, where you open the door, you don't open the door. And how cool is it that you now are digging up bones because of that?
No, it's fantastic. I could have been having a very boring life, stuck in a lab. Well, I would consider it boring anyway. And now it's completely different. It's about as far as removed from computer programming as you could possibly be.
So you're one of, well, for want of a better word, you're one of the lucky ones. You're one of the people that turned the book the right way, saw the piece of information at the right time. You think about how many of others are out there who are in computer labs.
Yes.
Or working for an insurance firm, selling insurance for refrigerators, or whatever it might be.
Well, they probably have a little bit more job security than I do.
Might have a little bit more money than me,
a little bit more lucrative.
But you're outside, you're doing something you love, you're
Yes.
discovering new things all the time. You
it's-
can't ask for much more, right?
It is pretty special, and you do have to pinch yourself continually. Yeah.
And so how do you do it from the Highlands? Because that's one of the things I really wanted to talk about and bring to this discussion. You live in the Highlands. You're employed by the University of New South Wales. They're, 75 kilometres apart, just in geography. And then you dig up stuff in Western Australia. How do you do that?
Yeah, look, I'm very fortunate in that I have very understanding bosses, the professors who sort of run our research group, Professor Mike Archer and Sue Hand. They have employed me on sort of a part-time basis, and within that, I usually travel up 2 or 3 times a week and try to do long days at the university in the preparation lab up there, and then I can spend the rest of the time at home working. So my job is split up between a lot of technical work, actually physically preparing the fossils, and there's also a lot of management. So I manage our annual field trip up to northwestern Queensland. So there's a lot of
northwestern Queensland. I said WA. Excuse me.
North anyway.
So you say technical work.
Yeah.
Like you're holding pieces of rock that contain fossils and doing what they do in Jurassic Park. Sorry, mate.
That's all right. It's got to come back to
you
Jurassic.
got little drills and little chisels and brushes, and you're just cleaning up the fossils. Is that what you're doing? No,
nothing like that. So yes, we are pretty far removed from the stereotypical view people have of little, carefully brushing dirt away.
I'm glad I asked the question.
From bones, but because our fossils from Riversley are actually preserved in limestone, so we essentially go up there, spend 10 days using explosives to blow rocks.
Now I know why you like paleontology.
Blow up the rocks. Then we use physically break them down with sledgehammers, and we collect maybe 2 tons of limestone just packed with bones, and we bring that back down to the university, and we spend the next year processing that limestone in acid labs we have at the university.
Hang on, you got to explain that a little bit further, because I just envisaged you putting the thing in acid, dissolving it, and then doing genetic sequencing or something else, as opposed to looking at physical bones.
No, we look at physical bones. So the limestone is very easily dissolved by a weak acetic acid, which is just a vinegar. And because the bone has some of the original bone phosphate in it and the original bone structure, it's actually stronger, chemically stronger than the limestone around it. So we'd take a block, maybe 50 kilogram block, a couple of feet in diameter, put it into a large acid vat with maybe 5-10% acetic acid, and over a week that would dissolve maybe 1 or 2 millimeters of limestone. Bring it out, wash it for the same amount of time to get rid of the crystals that build up, and then any bone that's become out on the surface, has become exposed, we use special resins to harden the bone, and then it goes back into the acid, and we just keep on going through the cycle until eventually bones fall out. And there's always a surprise in there. There's always something you weren't expecting. So these rocks are just chockers with bone.
I always think that it sounds really fascinating, and I'm like, I should do something cool like that. But then you describe, putting a piece of rock into an acid vat for, what did you say, 2 weeks?
Yeah, pretty much a week.
I don't have patience. It's not like I see the end product, and I see the blowing up stuff.
Yeah.
But all of the work in between, there's
a lot of work, but we have. At Riversley, we have 300 individual sites within the one major fossil area. So we have anywhere between 10 or 20 sites being processed in the laboratory at once. So you can just continually cycle through vats filled with rocks from different sites and different ages, and you're constantly moving them around, getting them out, preparing the fossils. And it's like a mystery box. So the rocks have been selected in the field because there was something eroding out on the surface, maybe a jaw with some teeth or something. But it's not until you actually get back and dissolve the rock that you'll find sometimes more interesting things. It might be an individual tooth, which represents the first evidence of a particular species of marsupial, or a whole jaw. Quite often we found, there was one case 2 years ago where we were just dissolving some large leg bones out, some diprotodontid wombat-like things were dissolving their leg bones out of the rock, and underneath the leg bones, we didn't know it was there, was a large Tasmanian tiger jaw, but this is from a species that was probably 2 or 3 times the size of the recently extinct Tasmanian tiger. And it was the first jaw we had of that species.
So there's a couple of things I want to sort of unpack there. The first is like discovery. I feel like the tone of your voice changes there. The pace at which you speak changes when you're talking about discovery. And it seems like that's something that's really important to you and something that you really enjoy. Is that correct?
Yeah, definitely. Out in the field, and this is what keeps you going. We're working in extremely hot conditions and dry savanna country. It's lovely, but it's very hot, hard work, dusty work. And just working on the site, it's not until you split open a rock and you see a skull or a jaw for the first. You're the first person ever to see this, and the potential for it to be something new, even if it's not new species, it's going to add to the overall picture, the story of evolution of these marsupials in Australia. And then when you get back to the field, there's that discovery again. Always, every block we work on has the potential to hold something very interesting and new in it.
I feel like that notion of discovery, that you said contribution to the evolutionary record, like that conversation or that story doesn't have the credibility is not the right word, but the excitement that it used to have. I feel like that kids growing up today, somehow that gets drowned out of us.
It does. You're right. A lot of people think most things have been discovered already, and all we're doing now is going over what's previously been found and sort of researching that to death, if you like. Whereas sites like Riversley we're going way back to the original dinosaur hunters who were in the wild west of America going out and finding these species.
So that's really cool that you're studying from the beginning. The dinosaurs, 65 million years ago, dinosaurs are destroyed, evolved into is that incorrect?
No, most dinosaurs went extinct 65 million years
the chickens survived.
That's right.
Yes.
Birds.
My two little chooks will be very happy to.
Birds are existing dinosaurs.
See, even my language around it is incorrect. So we're as a culture, where we don't even understand or don't articulate the evolutionary history correct, because we just we don't the science doesn't translate accurately.
Yeah, and that's the fault of a lot of the science communicators as well, paleontologists. We have to get out there and explain our discoveries a little better than we have.
And science communication must be really hard. And especially like this current environment that we have around science. What are your thoughts on? Really difficult question.
No.
Did I mention that Troy is employed by the University of New South Wales?
No, you're absolutely right, because there is in this climate there is a very limited pool of research money, research funding, and everyone wants to get their hands on it. And we are fully aware of the fact that we're not finding a cure for cancer. What we're doing is important and has implications for informing climate change, biodiversity, loss of biodiversity, etc., other environmental factors. So science communication has become very important. We need to get our story out there, but there's always this pressure to have the biggest, fastest, meanest. Where a lot of what we study, and particularly the groups I look at, some of these wombat groups, they weren't particularly mean.
Yeah, when you say wombat, and you're like, well, eats roots and leaves, you just think of, Fatso from A Country Practice.
Exactly. But these are intrinsically interesting, and they had their own story. In fact, one of the groups I worked on for my honours project, the Alariids, they're only known from a couple of teeth from Central Australia, and then from Riversley we found half a dozen jaws. That's the total record for this family. It's like a group that was as large as modern kangaroos today, but it only existed for 100,000, few million years. But it wasn't particularly ferocious or mean. It just looked like a...
Yeah, well, it's that science for science sake.
Mm.
So where and this is the, I guess, I remember thinking, I wasn't very old, but I remember thinking, having this internal thought about, where's the benefit of science? If you're just doing science for science sake and you learn things, well, great. But then where does that translate to the cure for cancer or whatever? So there's that ongoing discussion we need to have as humanity, for want of a better word, about, science for science sake is important.
Of course, it's very important, and this is blue sky research, blue sky science. Most of the discoveries that people think of throughout human history have come as a side. They weren't the focus of the project.
Yeah.
It's a spin-off from the project itself. Most of the things that we use today, and it's no difference in the biological sciences. Applied science is great, and looking for those cures for diseases, etc. But most of the findings that we have, most of the things we find useful, have come from out of left field, if you like. And then there's the intrinsic factor. These things should be studied because we should know where we've come from. It's only from the past may be a foreign place, but and it may not repeat, but it's certainly there are parts that we can learn from history, and things that are important for informing future decisions.
Yeah, and I think that bit about, it's almost it's ingrained in us to discover. It's from the moment we're old enough to explore our world. It's what we're doing, is we're discovering. And what's unique about you, for example, is you're making a living out of discovering, whereas, I might discover a new way to get to work. Well, I might discover a new coffee place.
Yeah, that's right.
The difference, and I shouldn't, I'm pretty fortunate. I really love what I do as well, but I think that a lot of people don't have that discovery in their lives anymore.
No, and we should get back to that if we can. Although, it's hard, as you said, making a living. Many paleontologists don't make a living, so there's still a fair degree of luck involved with this as well. And as I said before, very limited funding.
So how have you been lucky on your journey to be where you are now?
I happen to be in one of the most high-profile research groups. So a lot of people would know Mike Archer. He's a very recognisable science communicator in Australia. He talks about de-extinction of animals, bringing back the Tasmanian tiger.
Yeah, okay. Should we do that?
Not with me. I
kind of feel like I don't really, need a Tasmanian tiger chasing me and the kids.
Well,
or the chooks.
Look, he makes the valid points that for a lot of these animals, it was humans that were the cause of their extinction, and to a certain extent, we have an obligation to bring some of these animals back. And a lot of the ecosystems around the world are still, have evolved in response to these animals being there. So they still exist. The niches for these animals still exist in those ecosystems, and a lot of them can benefit the natural processes within those ecosystems by bringing them back.
What's the most exciting thing you've ever discovered?
Oh, look, there's so many. I think some of these...
there's just so many.
Well, I mean, it is. We would find probably half a dozen new species a year, a lot of which haven't been described yet. And I think some of these Tasmanian tigers, I've found jaws... and just individual teeth of species that were tiny. Just think of these animals that were from the size of a large wolf all the way down to, again, little possum-sized things.
That is really cool.
Yeah, to think of all these things were running around together at the one time. The rainforests that existed at Riversley, 20 million years ago, must have just been teeming with life. And it's to get your head around it, you're out there now in the field, and it's sort of open savanna basically with some riparian rainforest.
So for a layperson like myself, open savanna is what, like a rolling green, or not green, but rolling brown hills kind of thing?
Yeah, brown. These are mesas, flat land with some limestone mesas coming out.
What's a mese?
A mesa. It's a flat hill, basically, okay? And your brown plains of brown native grasses, and then there's some woodland as well, but very, very few trees. Any lush forest today is restricted just to these rivers that are permanently being fed by spring water. But 15, 20 million years ago, these were lush temperate rainforests you might find in lowland Borneo or even northern New South Wales. But large tracts of the country were covered in this rainforest.
It's so funny to think that a place like where we're sitting now in Barrel was completely different 10,000 years ago, 100,000 years ago, 1 million years ago. Was a completely different environment from what it is now.
Oh yeah, look, Australia's changed incredibly. We've gone from, as I said, being covered in most of the country covered in lush rainforests to, but from 10 to 5 million years ago, most of that contracted. So it was restricted just sort of to the east coast, and then a large part of Australia was very dry, and much of it covered in sand dunes. And then, of course, from there it's become lush again. But this happened over tens of thousands, if not millions of years.
I wondered whether I'd get to this topic. Do you've described changing environments, and we've got the current conundrum around climate change. Are you optimistic about the future of the environment based on your knowledge of geology and paleontology and the history of Earth?
Not at all, and I think all paleontologists would fall into the same category. Climate change is real. We study it every day. Our fossil record we're looking at Riversley shows cycles of climate change, 3 or 4 cycles, but all of these cycles are happening over millions of years.
Yeah, so I was going to ask you. So the climate's changed, and this is one of the arguments that people say when well, the climate's always changed, bro.
That's it, yeah.
But what you're describing is, yes, climate's change, but it happens over millennia.
That's right.
Not over decades.
It generally happens in the geological record, happens over millions of years. In the last million years, we've gone through a period of instability where climate change has happened over, in some cases, over tens or hundreds of thousands of years. But even so, that time was still enough for ecosystems and animal lineages, biodiversity to adapt. What we're doing is we have changed and will continue to change the climate at scales that are at least 1,000 times faster.
And I think one of the other things that probably science communicators could better describe is it's not just climate. So people think of climate as hot or cold or rain or whatever, but it's not just the climate. So for example, when you've got an area the size of the Sydney Basin that once upon a time was, I learnt this through the podcast, Hawkesbury sandstone covered in eucalypt forests. Yes. But now, 50% of that space is now concrete and tar and all of those things. So we're not directly changing the climate, but we're creating large spaces of the Earth that then have impacts on our environment. And the same goes with what we do to rivers. The same goes with what we do to soil. So it's not hot or cold weather, it's not rain, it's the impact we have on the Earth.
Exactly.
Or on the biosphere, rather.
We're the first species in the whole history of life to have such a dramatic impact.
So you believe in the
Anthropocene?
Yes.
Yeah, look, it's fairly controversial. I must admit.
I'm a believer.
We certainly, our impact will be around in the geological record for forever.
Yeah.
And the impacts we're having on the Earth will be around for a long time. We really need to
didn't expect to be talking about this, did you?
No, I didn't. we really need to be addressing the
this is your chance,
climate change because, as I was saying, at Riversley, we go through cycles of probably over 10 million year record that we have at Riversley. We go through, as I said before, probably 3 or 4 cycles of climate change.
Over 10 million years.
Yeah, where the temperature drops down at the end. 25 million years ago, it drops about 8 degrees. Then it recovers 4 degrees and it comes back down 4 degrees. But this is happening over 10 million years, and the ecosystems were changed dramatically. So we went from lush, not rainforest, but open forest. That basically collapsed because of the rapid cooling 25 million years ago. Then as the temperature recovered 4 or 5, lush rainforests came back. And then after that, they collapsed again. And this had dramatic effects. We saw whole families of marsupials. So when I say family, you can think of macropodids, kangaroos today, or koalas as a family. So
well, there's one. Well, it's not one type of koala, but
there's only one koala, it's one species today. But say so wombats, we have 3 species of wombat today. That represents one family. Yeah. Most kangaroos are within one family as well. Yeah. So what we've seen at Riversley is a lot of these families went extinct because of climate change. Yeah. And others arose, but it happened over millions of years, and we're doing it in 100 to a couple of 100 years. Yeah. And the fear is that the ecosystems will almost certainly not be able to adapt that rate of change.
I read today half of the barrier reef is dead, and probably over the last week I've seen 2 articles that have said climate change is irreversible. Not just irreversible, but like cataclysmically irreversible. End up what's like Mercury? What's the planet? Not Venus. Venus that has the runaway.
Yeah,
greenhouse effect.
Greenhouse, that's right.
Yeah, yes. So that kind of cataclysm, like we're all doomed.
Well, that is the big fear, and a paper came out just in the last week talking about the positive feedbacks. The fear is that once you get one feedback, it feeds into another, and we see this time and time again in different cycles in the biological world, that they start to feed in and it will lead to a runaway. System.
I think it's really fascinating, and that's why I did want to talk about it. I didn't know if we'd get to it in this conversation, but how do you bring back? So somewhere along the lines, we as a species have gone from the joy of discovery to destroying things for profit, for want of a better word. So how? I don't expect you to have the answer for this, but somewhere we've got to have the conversation where we have to decide that digging stuff out of the ground for profit forever isn't the best way to go, or there's got to be you got to find some balance somewhere. Otherwise, we're just going to ruin this, and there'll be nothing left to discover.
Yeah, exactly. Look, sustainability is a conversation we've got to be having, and all the evidence that we're looking at from paleontological perspective is that everything is out of balance at the moment. We're not being sustainable at all, and we really need to start talking about, doing more than talking, start acting, and looking at ways in which we can live sustainably. I mean, I think the average Australian, if the whole world lived like the average Australian, would need 3 or 4 planets. The resources we're going through it's crazy, and this is where paleontology, I think, is effective in showing us how the world changes. We are constantly changing, that's right, but we're doing it at a sustainable. We have in the past always done it in a sustainable way, and life adapts. Again, going back to Jurassic Park, life finds a way.
Yeah, and I think that's and like I'm amongst the uneducated on this one, right? And so there's people like me who go, yeah, we'll adapt, it'll be fine. Science will come up with some mechanism of taking the carbon out of the air. It'll get hotter, but we'll all move south. There's like I said, the uneducated amongst us that think, well, yeah, this will be fine. And this is one of the things I wanted to talk to you about is science has been so successful in showing that things have been overcome in the past because, and this is actually, I think, the greatest problem for science and its greatest success is that science has actually shown that what we thought in the past to be correct is now incorrect. And so people are going, well, you climate scientists, how do we know you're not going to be incorrect in 20 years time? And so it is the, not just the conundrum of scientists, but it's like the conundrum of the 21st century. How do we convince people that science is right again?
Yeah, look, all I can say is that the evidence we have is overwhelming, and it's from every field. It's not restricted to climate science. It's geologists, biologists, atmospheric scientists. Everyone is convinced that, okay, then we can argue about the effects, the impacts, how much.
The future, because you're correlating the future, aren't you, from...
That's right.
Causation?
Yeah, that's right. Difference between correlation and causation.
Yeah.
We can argue about the
extrapolating,
ends, the extremities, if you like, but we all agree that this is going to happen. And we've been lucky in the past, humans. I mean, Ehrlich talked about the population bomb back in the 60s. Now, it was only, and he was wrong, but, and again, science came to the rescue there, the Green Revolution, fertilizers, etc., the increase in agriculture. But the fear is this time that we don't know. We're heading into uncharted waters, and there may be no quick fix. Taking carbon out of the atmosphere. What's the best thing that's ever evolved? Plants for taking carbon out. And we're deforesting at ever increasing rates.
I read in New South Wales that deforestation or land clearing has increased 80%, or was it 800%? Something crazy.
It's ridiculous. That's right.
Yeah, I kind of feel. That we're, like I said, we've replaced discovery with, I don't know, it's almost anger.
Yeah, and look, but there may well be scientific advances in the future that will, and undoubtedly there will be, that will help, and life will go on. No matter what happens, life will go on. Humans will go on. If we wipe out 99% of all human life, we've still got 70 million people. We'll still be the most dominant vertebrate animal on the planet. That is true. But the problem is, civilization, we will go through incredible periods of suffering. The rest of the world will go through. The animal, all biodiversity will go through. Not
us lucky folk down here in the Highlands.
I think we'll be cool the last affected.
To our east, all of a sudden we'll have a waterfront at Robertson.
Water views.
Water views in Robbo. Barrel will be like the Bahamas. So I'm actually all for
all for it.
My what is it? The military industrial complex. My military industrial complex for my overlords. I wish for you to succeed. Give me waterfront at Robbo.
Well, that's right. Once again, it'll be the poor. It'll be the majority of the world that suffers. We in the rich West will be the last to suffer, essentially.
So, what would you like? If you could talk to your sort of 10 or 12-year-old self. Would you say go on this journey, or would you say try something else?
My journey?
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Look, definitely. I wouldn't change anything. I don't think.
What about to any aspiring paleontologists or geologists out there?
Look, I think you've got to go with the lesson is you've got to go with what you love, and generally you're good at what you love. You should stick to that, but you should also realise that it is going to be hard at times, and you may have to change directions a few times
like you did.
Yeah.
And how do you, when the going is tough and you've got exams to do or travel, like you said you're travelling up to Sydney 3 days.
2 or 3 days a week.
When the going's tough, how do you keep yourself motivated?
Well, as you said before, you look back, you think back to what you pinch yourself and think, what am I doing? I'm doing something different, and there is that discovery. There's always that discovery there. So, okay, I'm going back into the lab. I'm just throwing rocks back into acid again. But one of the times when I do it, something unique's going to fall out, and it's going to be another eureka moment. So,
and your name's in history books somewhere, wouldn't it? As the discoverer of. Co-discoverer of?
Oh, yeah, I think so.
Sole discoverer
I mentioned a few times in different books. I've written a few research papers, so there's that there as well.
So you leave a legacy behind.
Yeah, that's right.
And I think that's probably the main thing that I wanted to get across in this discussion is, discovery for discovery's sake is really cool. Whether it's paleontology or whatever.
Yeah.
The ability to learn something that hasn't been learnt before, to pass that information on to other people is what makes us us.
I think so. Yeah, I think discovery is an important part of everyone's life.
Yeah.
You just got to find where that is.
Yeah, and I like, as I've got school-age children, or so my oldest is in school. I hope, like, if he became a paleontologist or an archaeologist or Indiana Jones, whatever, I think that's be really fascinating. I'll be turning him away and say, don't do what Dad did, and work for News Corporation. Don't do that.
Look, I think you can find discovery. You don't have to go out and be an Indiana Jones. I mean, that's great if you are, but you just have to look for what you can discover in your field, really.
Yeah, okay.
I think.
So how would a listener discover more about your research projects?
So they can just Google the Pangea Research Centre at the University of New South Wales.
You're going to have to spell that because...
So Pangea is
here we go as a test.
Pangea is P-A-N-G-E-A. So
that's easy.
Pangea was actually the large... When all the continents of the world were joined together, it was called Pangea before it split into Gondwana and Laurasia. So
see, I always know Gondwana. I did Laurasia. Whatever, you northern bastards.
So, you type in Riversley Research or Pangea. It'll bring up Google. It'll bring up our pages, web pages at the university.
University of New South Wales, UNSW.edu.
UNSW. Yep, and there's also the Riversley Society. We have a society which you can could Google that as well and find people can join up and get involved in the research or even come out into the field if they want to as a volunteer.
Awesome. This is I've loved this podcast. As I said, just general conversations with real people doing real things. This is why I started this. So it's been a really fascinating conversation. Thank you so much.
No, thank you, Dave.
This has been HighCast episode 27 with Troy Myers. Check out Brightspenders, brightspenders.com, not .au, brightspenders.com. Go there, have fun, and next time, who is next time? I think it is, well, if I can organise it, get your act together, Zach. If I can organise it, it's Zach and Co from Rare Cancers Australia. See you next time.